Sorry, I just got an urgent message.
Oh, is everything okay?
Yeah, I think so, thanks.
A barista solves a guest's problem in 6 languages, unaware her customer was a global CEO billionaire. The morning the world quietly tested her heart, Emily Carter had already lost faith in miracles. The sky over Seattle hung low and gray, rain pressing against the cafe windows like a reminder of bills unpaid, dreams delayed, and prayers whispered too often without answers. Inside the small corner cafe, the smell of burnt espresso and cinnamon pastries mixed with the dull hum of a tired city waking up. Emily tied her apron with hands that trembled just slightly, unaware that before the sun set, her life would fracture and remake itself in ways she could never have imagined. If you believe that kindness still matters in a world rushing past pain, take a moment right now to like, comment, share, and subscribe to this channel. Stories like this are for those who still believe in second chances and quiet miracles. Emily was 27, a barista by profession and a translator by survival. Her ability to speak 6 languages had not come from privilege or travel for pleasure, but from necessity. She grew up in a small town in Oregon with a mother who cleaned offices at night and a father who disappeared early, leaving silence and debt behind. Emily learned Spanish from neighbors, French from a retired teacher who traded lessons for groceries, German and Italian from free online courses taken after midnight shifts, and Mandarin from a church outreach program helping immigrants navigate paperwork. Each language became a rope she tied around her future, hoping one day they would pull her out of the water. But hope, like rent, came due every month. That morning, her phone buzzed with a reminder she had been dreading. The hospital payment for her younger brother Daniel was overdue again. Daniel had been injured in a warehouse accident 2 years earlier, leaving him unable to work and dependent on treatments that insurance only half covered. Emily carried that weight silently, smiling at customers, drawing hearts in foam, and hiding the fact that every tip jar coin felt like a prayer begging to be answered. The cafe door opened and closed with the rhythm of the morning rush, until one man stepped in who did not belong to the noise. He moved slowly, as if the world around him required careful navigation. He was tall, silver-haired, dressed simply but with an ease that suggested wealth without announcement. His eyes held exhaustion deeper than jet lag, the kind that came from responsibility rather than lack of sleep. His name was James Whitmore, though to Emily he was just another customer, another face passing through her fragile routine. James had flown in overnight from Zurich, his mind heavy with a crisis that spreadsheets could not solve. A multi-billion-dollar acquisition had collapsed hours before signing due to a misinterpreted clause buried in foreign language contracts. Lawyers were scrambling, shareholders restless, and a single misunderstanding threatened to cost thousands of employees their jobs across 3 continents. He had walked into the cafe not for coffee, but for air, for a moment of stillness before the storm resumed. When James approached the counter, he struggled to place his order, not because of language exactly, but because his phone buzzed constantly with messages in different tongues, each one more urgent than the last. Emily noticed his confusion, the way his shoulders tightened as he scrolled, the quiet panic behind his composed exterior. Something in her recognized that look. It was the same look her mother wore opening overdue bills, the same look she herself saw in the mirror at night. Without thinking, Emily leaned forward and gently asked if he needed help. When he showed her the screen, a mess of emails in German, French, Italian, Mandarin, and Spanish, Emily felt the strange calm that came when purpose met preparation. She began translating, not theatrically, but efficiently, moving from one language to the next like turning pages in a familiar book. She summarized legal concerns, clarified tone, and pointed out where wording differences had created the crisis. Her voice was steady, her mind sharp, her heart completely unaware that she was untangling the emergency of one of the most powerful men on the planet. Customers behind James grew impatient, the espresso machine hissed, and her manager frowned, but Emily kept going. This mattered. She had lived her life fixing problems quietly, without credit, without applause. This was no different. To her, it was just another human moment, another chance to be useful. James listened, stunned. Years of boardrooms and consultants had not delivered clarity as swiftly as this barista with tired eyes and a name tag slightly chipped at the edges. Within minutes, he understood where the breakdown had occurred and how it could be repaired. He stepped aside, making urgent calls, his voice now steady, confident. The crisis did not vanish, but it shifted, becoming manageable. Emily returned to the register, heart racing, unsure why her hands shook. She felt embarrassed, afraid she had overstepped. The rest of her shift passed in a blur of orders and polite smiles. When her manager scolded her later for slowing the line, she nodded, swallowing the familiar ache of being misunderstood. Good intentions did not pay rent. By the time her shift ended, the rain had stopped. Emily stepped outside, the city washed clean, her thoughts heavy again with Daniel's treatments and the future pressing in. She almost did not notice James waiting near the door. He thanked her, simply at first, then asked about her languages, her life, her dreams. Emily answered honestly, because lying required energy she did not have. She spoke of her brother, her mother, her exhaustion, and the quiet hope that one day she might work as a translator, helping people navigate systems too big and cold to care. James listened the way powerful people rarely did, without interrupting, without checking his phone. He left soon after, offering nothing more than a business card and a promise to stay in touch. Emily tucked the card into her apron, assuming it would lead nowhere. Promises often did. Days passed. Bills remained. Daniel's condition worsened. Emily prayed harder, worked longer, slept less. Then one afternoon, her phone rang with a number she did not recognize. The voice on the other end spoke calmly, professionally, explaining that James Whitmore was the CEO of Whitmore Global, and he wanted to offer Emily an opportunity. The job was not charity. It was a position in their international communications division, with training, benefits, and a salary that made her sit down on the cafe's back steps and cry until her chest hurt. More than that, the company's health plan would fully cover Daniel's treatments. Her mother could stop working nights. The rope Emily had been tying for years finally pulled. Emily accepted, terrified and grateful, stepping into a world of glass offices and global impact. She learned quickly that power did not always look like cruelty, and that kindness, when paired with humility, could reshape systems. She carried her cafe apron folded in a drawer, a reminder of where she began and why she never looked away when someone struggled. Months later, Emily stood in a conference room overlooking the city, translating negotiations that would protect thousands of jobs. James watched quietly, not as a savior, but as a witness to what happened when people were seen. He never told the world her story. He did not need to. The miracle was not the money or the title. It was the recognition of worth where the world had overlooked it. If this story is touching your heart right now, if it reminds you that small acts can ripple into lives far beyond what we see, please take a moment to like and share this video. Your support helps stories like this reach others who need hope today. Emily never stopped believing that God moved through ordinary moments. She volunteered on weekends, teaching languages at the same church where she once learned Mandarin, watching others discover their own ropes out of the water. Daniel recovered enough to walk again. Her mother smiled more. Life did not become perfect, but it became possible. Just before this story ends, we have one special request for you. Please comment below with one word that describes how this story made you feel. Your words matter more than you know. In the end, the world did not change because a billionaire was helped. It changed because a tired barista chose kindness over fear, service over self-preservation, and love over indifference. And somewhere, in a small cafe that smelled of cinnamon and rain, miracles were still quietly being made. The first months inside Whitmore Global felt unreal to Emily, like stepping into someone else's life while still carrying the weight of her own past in her pockets. The glass elevators, the quiet confidence of people who never checked prices on menus, the meetings where decisions shaped cities she had only read about, it all pressed against her senses. Yet every morning, as she stood before the mirror tying her hair back, she reminded herself that she had earned this place not by luck, but by listening when someone needed help. Her transition was not easy. Emily discovered quickly that intelligence alone did not protect her from doubt. In conference rooms filled with polished voices and sharp suits, she sometimes felt the old cafe apron still clinging to her skin. There were days when her hands shook the same way they did at the espresso machine, when she feared she would be exposed as an accident, a charity case mistaken for talent. The whispers of insecurity followed her home, creeping into the quiet hours when she sat beside Daniel's hospital bed, listening to the steady rhythm of machines keeping him stable. Daniel noticed the change in her long before she spoke of it. His recovery was slow, painful, and uncertain, but he watched his sister carry herself differently now, with a steadiness he had not seen since childhood. The treatments funded by Whitmore Global gave him hope, but it was Emily's presence, calmer, less frantic, that healed him in ways medicine could not measure. She no longer looked like someone drowning. She looked like someone learning how to breathe. James Whitmore remained a distant figure, respectful and intentional about boundaries. He never hovered, never reminded Emily of the cafe, never treated her as a symbol of his generosity. That restraint became one of the greatest lessons of her new life. True kindness, she realized, did not demand gratitude or loyalty. It simply created space for growth and stepped back. Yet challenges emerged that no contract or salary could solve. 6 months into her role, Emily was assigned to a crisis that mirrored her own past more closely than she expected. Whitmore Global planned to close a manufacturing plant in a struggling Midwestern town in the United States, relocating operations overseas to cut costs. On paper, it made sense. In reality, it would devastate thousands of families, many already living paycheck to paycheck. Emily was tasked with translating community feedback reports and foreign partner proposals, but as she read the documents, she saw faces instead of numbers. She saw her mother. She saw her neighbors. She saw herself. The weight of it crushed her. Nights became restless again. She prayed more, asking God why opportunity so often stood on someone else's loss. Her faith, once quiet and simple, now wrestled with complexity. She wondered if her success meant complicity, if climbing out of poverty required leaving others behind. The same question echoed in her chest as she walked through the office halls, carrying files that might decide the fate of a town she had never visited but somehow deeply understood. Emily did something risky. She compiled not just translations but stories, voices from workers, handwritten letters, local newspaper excerpts, all translated into 6 languages so no executive could claim ignorance. She included economic data, yes, but also testimonies of families, churches, and schools that depended on the plant's survival. She submitted the report knowing it could be ignored, or worse, mark her as unprofessional. For days, nothing happened. Then James called an emergency board meeting. Emily was not invited, but she knew. The air in the building shifted. Conversations softened. Tensions rose. Weeks later, the decision was announced. The plant would remain open, restructured instead of abandoned, with new investment in training and technology. It would cost more in the short term, but preserve dignity, stability, and community. The announcement did not mention Emily's report. It did not need to. She cried alone in her car that evening, overwhelmed not by victory, but by relief. For the first time, she understood that her voice mattered beyond survival. Her languages were not just tools for escape, they were bridges, capable of carrying compassion across borders that money alone could not cross. Word of her work spread quietly. Colleagues began seeking her insight, not just for accuracy, but for understanding. Emily became known as someone who listened before translating, who asked what words meant to people, not just what they said. She still felt small sometimes, but no longer invisible. At home, Life continued to heal in gentle ways. Daniel took his first unaided steps on a cool autumn morning, his laughter echoing down the hospital hallway like a hymn of gratitude. Their mother attended church in daylight now, no longer exhausted from night shifts, her prayers less desperate, more thankful. The Carter family meals became moments of reflection, gratitude shared over simple food, faith renewed through evidence rather than hope alone. Emily never returned to the cafe as an employee, but she visited often. She tipped generously, remembered names, and noticed the quiet struggles behind tired smiles. One afternoon, she paid for a young barista's textbooks without leaving her name. Another time, she helped an immigrant couple fill out job applications in 3 languages, reminding herself that miracles multiplied when passed on. Years later, Emily stood on a stage at a small community college, invited to speak about communication and compassion in global business. She looked out at students who reminded her of who she used to be, hungry, afraid, hopeful. She spoke not of billionaires or success, but of listening, humility, and the power of being useful where you stand. She spoke of faith not as certainty, but as courage to act kindly even when the outcome is unknown. James Whitmore retired quietly soon after, his legacy not measured only in profit, but in policies shaped by conscience. On his last day, he sent Emily a handwritten note thanking her for reminding him why leadership mattered. She kept it tucked inside her Bible, next to verses she once read through tears. If this continuation of the story moved you, if it reminded you that your voice can change lives even when the world tells you it's too small, please take a moment to like, share, and engage with this video. Your interaction helps spread stories of faith, kindness, and second chances to those who need them most. Just before we close, we have one heartfelt request for you. Please comment below and tell us, have you ever helped someone without knowing how far it would go? Your story might be the encouragement someone else is praying for. Emily Carter never became famous. Her name did not trend, her face did not appear on magazine covers. But in offices, hospitals, factories, and quiet cafes across the United States, her impact lived on through people who felt seen, heard, and valued. And in the gentle unfolding of ordinary days, she learned the truth she had once searched for so desperately, that sometimes God changes the world not through power, but through a willing heart standing behind a counter, choosing kindness in 6 languages and one unshakable faith. Time did not slow down after that. Instead, it deepened. The years that followed shaped Emily Carter not with sudden miracles, but with steady purpose, the kind that grows quietly like roots beneath the surface. She no longer measured her life by emergencies survived, but by people strengthened. And yet, life had one more test waiting, one that would circle back to the very beginning, to the cafe where rain once pressed against the windows and hope felt fragile. Whitmore Global expanded its community outreach programs across the United States, investing in education, healthcare access, and language services for underserved populations. Emily was asked to lead a new initiative focused on immigrant workers and low-income families who struggled to navigate legal and medical systems due to language barriers. The responsibility felt heavy. She knew the faces behind the statistics. She had lived among them. The work demanded long hours, emotional resilience, and the ability to hear painful stories without hardening her heart. Emily traveled to small towns, factory districts, and inner-city neighborhoods, sitting across from families who reminded her of her own childhood. She listened to mothers afraid of hospitals, fathers ashamed of asking for help, children translating adult fears far too early. Every story chipped away at her, but also fueled her resolve. This was why she had been given those languages, not for status, but for service. One winter evening, while visiting Seattle for a conference, Emily felt a quiet pull and walked back to the old cafe. The sign was faded now, the windows newly replaced, but the smell of coffee and cinnamon remained unchanged. She sat at a corner table, watching baristas move with the same practiced exhaustion she once carried. For a moment, she closed her eyes and remembered who she was on the day everything changed. Not the confident leader she had become, but the tired sister praying for rent money and healing. As she sat there, she noticed a young woman behind the counter struggling with a customer who spoke little English. The line grew restless, frustration flickered. Emily recognized the moment instantly, the crossroad between kindness and indifference. She stood, gently stepped forward and helped translate, calming the situation in seconds. The relief on the barista's face mirrored her own from years ago. That barista's name was Hannah. Over the next weeks, Emily returned often. She learned that Hannah was putting herself through college, caring for a sick father, and hiding her fear behind a practiced smile. Emily did not reveal who she was. She simply listened, encouraged, and eventually offered Hannah a scholarship through the outreach program, one that would change her path just as Emily's had once changed. The circle closed quietly. Meanwhile, Daniel's life continued to bloom. He enrolled in a physical therapy certification program, inspired by the nurses who once cared for him. Watching her brother help others walk again became one of Emily's greatest joys. Their mother, now volunteering at church and community kitchens, often said that God had answered their prayers not all at once, but piece by piece, in ways they could carry. Yet success never erased grief entirely. Emily still missed her father, still wondered who she might have been if abandonment had not shaped her early years. One evening, after a long day of work, she sat alone in her apartment and allowed herself to mourn, not the past itself, but the girl who had survived it without knowing why. Healing, she realized, did not mean forgetting pain. It meant transforming it into something that could shelter others. Her faith matured alongside her purpose. Prayer became less about asking and more about listening. She learned to trust silence, to believe that obedience in small moments mattered as much as grand gestures. When she spoke at churches, universities, and community centers, she never positioned herself as a success story. She spoke as a witness to kindness, to perseverance, to the power of seeing people fully. Years later, at a national conference on ethical leadership, Emily was invited to deliver the closing address. Standing beneath bright lights, she felt the familiar flutter of nerves, but also peace. She spoke of language not as words, but as bridges. She spoke of leadership not as authority, but as responsibility. And she spoke of the unseen, baristas, cleaners, caregivers, who carried wisdom the world too often overlooked. The applause was long, but what mattered more were the messages that followed. People wrote to say they had noticed someone they once ignored, that they had listened instead of rushing, that they had chosen kindness when it was inconvenient. Emily kept those messages in a folder she opened on hard days, a reminder that ripples continued long after stones disappeared beneath the water. When James Whitmore passed away quietly at the age of 82, Emily attended the memorial not as an employee, but as a friend. There were speeches about innovation and legacy, but Emily remembered him most for the moment he stood in a cafe, vulnerable and overwhelmed, willing to accept help from someone the world might have dismissed. His greatest leadership, she believed, had been humility. On the evening of the memorial, Emily walked alone along the waterfront, the city lights reflecting on the water like scattered prayers. She whispered a thank you to God, to life, to every struggle that had shaped her compassion. She understood now that miracles did not always announce themselves. Sometimes they arrived disguised as ordinary moments, asking only for attention and courage. If this story has stayed with you through all its parts, if it has reminded you that small kindness can echo through years and lives, please take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Your engagement helps keep stories like this alive for others who may be losing hope. And before we say goodbye, we have one final request. Please comment below and tell us, what simple act of kindness do you believe can change a life? Your answer might inspire someone more than you realize. Emily Carter never stopped being a barista at heart. She still believed in warm cups, patient listening, and meeting people where they were. The world called her a leader, a translator, a change maker, but she knew the truth. She was simply someone who chose to help when she could, unaware at first of how far that choice would travel. And somewhere right now, in a small cafe under a gray sky, another quiet miracle is waiting to begin.